Hello and welcome back to my movie corner. As you can see, I'm still wearing my Light of the World t-shirt, which means it's time for another Professor Dave Rebuts video. So today we're doing question 3 out of the video, and like I said, I'll post the original video link in the description of each video, so that way if you're here and you kind of forget what he was talking about, or if you want to know what he was, kind of talking about, then we can kind of discuss that and we can kind of figure out like how does this relate to what we're generally talking about when we look at these different things. So one of the things that Dr. Kent Hovind likes to say is that each animal was taken after their kind. He was like, well, what is a kind? We don't know what a kind is. Okay. Well, when we start looking at the biological classifications of life, um, and I know Wikipedia isn't always the best uh, way to do it, but it's probably the easiest because that's kind of where it's going to hit into where we are. So, in terms of biological classification, how we decided to categorize every single life form that we found on this earth, from the lowliest bacteria and virus all the way up to ourselves, okay, is a um well, the best the best way to look at it is we use the hierarchy of biological classification, and they've really expanded it. When I learned it, it was just the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, and that was it. That was the only thing that we had to learn. Okay, and they've since added domain and life. So they're like saying this is life, and then you have a domain, and then you have kingdoms, and it's like whatever. So basically, how that works um, is like, for instance, right now I think they have 5 kingdoms because, uh, um, well, they keep adding kingdoms, but basically, um, like they just won't stop adding kingdoms. I'm reading down the thing here, and they just keep adding kingdoms, adding kingdoms, adding. Oh, fuck it. But basically, um, so when we start talking about, so the original one that I learned was there was 2 kingdoms. There was Animalia and there was Plante. Okay, and that was sort of that was the classification of, if you weren't respiring, you were a plant. Okay, because you were making your own food and you were an autotroph. If you weren't, then you were a mammal or you were an animal. And that was, everything was classified that way, and then they went that way. And the funny thing is that like some of these had higher classifications, but in general scientific biology that I was taught growing up in school, even through the 90s, we never went into more than like 3 kingdoms. I think they might have gone and said, well, bacteria are technically their own kingdom, but we can still classify them as animals, so we're still going to use the 2 kingdoms effect. And I mean, I graduated in 1999, folks. Just to kind of tell you like how old I am, and add 1 to that because I'm actually I was a 5-year high school student, so that tells you how old I am in 2020. But anyway, so the whole point of this is that when we start talking about kind, okay, we are now starting to get down into the. So we start with kingdom, which is the highest classification level. Okay, besides the domain and life, I'm not going to worry about that shit. Um, because technically, you don't need to know that rocks are its own separate category. I think you can figure that out for yourself. This is about living things, plants and animals, bacteria and viruses, which are classified as living and non-living. They're kind of like Schrodinger's cat. Um, it's coming and going. Yay. So it's living and non-living at the same time, which is why viruses are hard to treat because you can't just kill them with normal like antibiotics. Okay. But anyway, that's just getting off topic. But basically, when you start getting down around class order, it's like when you start breaking things down into the next level to where you actually start going out more so that it's like you actually start dividing things by what they are. So like when you start talking about like canines and felines and horse and horse and their associated thing, and that's and like I said, that's like class or order. That's what kind is. That's about where that cutoff is. You wanted a specific definition. I'm giving you the very specific fucking definition. Okay? So if you can't figure this shit out on your own, I can't help you. Okay? So how then all of the species on Earth today can have been derived from those original kinds? Well, think about it, dude. Look at Darwin's finches. Okay? So if you look at, I mean, this is the one thing Darwin did right when he was writing The Origin of Species. When he was saying that there was like some finches that flew out to the islands and they started, their beaks started evolving to adapt to the different areas on the island because like some were in very rocky, barren areas, and so they evolved certain like beaks, and like some had pointed beaks and others had like rounded beaks, and they were useful for certain things. Well, that's how. Okay, those things can come because if you go back up a ways, and like I was saying in the previous video, if you go back up and you look at like canines, we bred a lot of the dogs that we have today, the domesticated dogs that we have today, that have certain traits. So that means we had to take certain like wolves and coyotes and dingoes and different wild dogs, and we had to breed them for certain traits. That's where you start to get that's where you start to get the species, because the species is the lowest classification from kind. Speciation does not equal kind, okay? So stop your fucking bullshit. Speciation doesn't mean shit when you're talking about evolution. Because when you're talking about evolution, you are now back up around order or class, and that's where you have to stop. And that's where you have to say that nothing from like, you can't have a whale become a cow. It doesn't happen. Sure, we can call them the cow of the sea because they're big and lumbering and they move real slow like a cow does. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden a whale decided to jump up on the beach, grow legs, and start walking away. Or that a cow jumped in the sea and its legs shrank and it grew gilled and it started floating underwater. It doesn't happen, dude. You show me that intermediate species. You talk about intermediate species in the last video. You show me that intermediate species. Where's that? I'd love to see that. Okay? Some whale with like half a fucking foot and like a flipper. It'd be worthless. It would fucking die. Because it wouldn't have enough to be able to live where it is. It couldn't walk on the land, so it couldn't find anything to eat, and it couldn't swim under the water, so it wouldn't be able to find anything to eat. How dumb do you have to be to see this? Honestly, dude. You call yourself a professor, but I honestly don't think you've ever really given any serious thought to the shit you spout. Okay? That you can look at a house. I meant to say this in the last video, but I was kind of running out of time, so I ended it. But you can look at a house and you can say that house is beautifully constructed. You look at a human or a tree and you say, wow, that was random chance. Bull fucking shit. I'm calling you out right now. Because I can tell you, I am beautifully and wonderfully made. I am knit together in my mother's womb. And that's Psalm 139. You can go fucking check it. Okay? Because that's how all those little proteins get made. To make you. Okay? It has to literally unzip the DNA and zip it back up again as it goes. And then it takes that over to the cells and it actually like puts it into the different parts of the cell, and out pops a protein, and then that protein is carried to its location and attached to the next protein in line, and it forms a link. That's how your hair grows. Okay, that's why your skin falls off, because eventually you make enough protein back here that your skin cells on the top just kind of slough off. Okay? Because it doesn't need it anymore. Your body goes, I don't need that layer, and it sheds it. Because it's continually putting new layers on the bottom, okay, up to the top. The same thing with your hair. That's why you have to go get a haircut, because your hair gets long. In fact, I'm starting to need a haircut again. Okay? So again, that's what a kind is. And mechanistically, you already have explained it, dude. How all of the species could have been derived from their original kinds. Think about it, dude. If the kind is back up in class or order, and like I said, I can't remember exactly which, but it's class or order. It's right in there. Okay, and like I said, it's when you start splitting off into the different, like you have feline, you have canine, you have, the equine, you have, like the hippopotamus and those kind of things. You have all these different, you have that different distinction. And then, like, from there, everything is then just a branch of that. And I want to say it's class, I think is where that is. And then from there, then you start branching out into different things. But those can interbreed, okay? And then those things can interbreed. And then you start getting down. So then they have the order. And then the order breeds and it can become the family. You can have new families from two things, different things breeding, okay? Like a liger, like I said, you have a liger. A liger is, they took a lion, which is a different order in a or family, and you have a tiger, which is a different family, and you can breed them, and you come up with a whole new genus called the liger. Okay, and then that becomes its own species because then you just put genus species, so we're Homo sapiens. Um, but that's kind of what you do. You put it down there, okay, and then it becomes its own species, and then and that's what I'm saying. You can have different things because that's about where the level is when you talk about kinds. So if you want to talk about like how did they get cows? Well, they got cows because they started breeding certain animals of the bovine family, okay, together, and they got domesticated cows. They started domesticating these cows. They had cows in the Bible, okay? Back in, I mean, you go read the book of Job, which is actually something that takes place like during like before Abram's time. Okay, it's like one of the oldest books of the Bible besides Genesis. Job was a man who had like camels and oxen and cows and all these different things. I mean, he had all these different animals that were modern animals, things that we use today, which means that they had them like 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. And we found fossilized evidence of domesticated animals right next to, dinosaurs in that region. Okay? And we'll get to the flood here in a second, but I'm just kind of like, kind of going off on this to kind of tell you that this is what it is. So for you to sit there and think that species can't be because I say that there are different taxonomic classifications, they can't interbreed, is wrong. Because, like I said, if you have something that's within that same kind, it takes after its kind. We are a different kind than ape or chimpanzee or gorilla, okay? Because they're all in their own family and we're in a separate category, okay? And so we don't interbreed with them because, like I said, we have different chromosome counts than they do. We can't intermingle with them. So you can't go back up the ladder and say, oh, if we take this type of ape and this type of human and breed them together, we will get a new thing. You can't do that, okay? Because we can't go back up that high. How we went this way and they went this way at that time shows that we were meant to be created different than an ape, than that family, okay? Because we can't breed with them. All right, we can't create that. That's what I'm saying. That's where kind is. It's up there in the class order class area. Okay, That's where kind is. It's where it starts to segment. It's when we started looking at genetics and going, wow, we have this many chromosomes. Dogs have this many chromosomes. Wolves have this many chromosomes. You can breed like a German Shepherd and a wolf. They can still breed. You can breed a Chihuahua with a coyote. I don't know how, but you could. Okay, I mean the coyote would rather probably just chomp down on the Chihuahua and eat it for dinner, but you could technically breed those two and create a new breed of dog. That's a new species, you dumbass. And that's why I'm calling you a dumbass, is because you'd have to be an idiot not to figure this out on your own. Come on, man, use that brain of yours. I mean, you say you got a master's degree in teaching, yet you don't know the basics of your own freaking thing you were supposed to be teaching people. Freaking stupid. All right, let's jump in here. Okay. So this one's going to take a little bit of explaining. So it says, so question 4. Why do so many animal species live exclusively in a specific part of the world? Well, Kent Hovind has explained this many times, but I'll go ahead and explain it in a very general way. So the Ark, they think, is on Mount Ararat in Turkey. Like, you can actually go there and you can see that there's like this irregularly shaped oblong kind of a thing, and it actually measures to the dimensions of the Ark. And it's an actual fossilized. They think it's a fossilized boat, and what they look at, they think it's about the same size. And what they used was they went to Ken Ham's Ark Museum when he got it built, and actually like measured it, and then went back to that place on Mount Ararat, and they actually measured it, and they actually found that it was the same thing. So it took them like a year or two to get out of the Ark. Okay. Then once they did that, they figure that Noah and his first son Shem stayed here. Ham and Japheth went in two separate directions, and what they think was is that they followed the animals, and as animals went to different parts of the world, they got cut off as the water was receding, or the water had receded to a certain point and then was coming back. Okay, because there was a way that some things happen, like erosion and some different things. He's got a whole like explanation of it in one of his video series. He's got a whole explanation of how all of the species got to where they were, because they all were going. They, like, predators were following certain animals that they love to hunt, and they think that the ark was actually big enough that the animals in the beginning started to populate inside the ark, and then they finally had to let them go because it was just getting too much room. And so they let them all go, and then they let the predators, after the herd animals went, and they kept some of them for themselves. They let the rest of the predators go, and wherever predators went, they went. Okay, and like I said, he's got a whole explanation on how that works, which is why you have like lions and tigers and stuff. Like, you have Bengal tigers over here, and you have tigers in Africa. You can actually breed those, and they'll breed. Now, could they? Would they? We don't know in the wild, because they have never met. But if you were to take like certain lions from one part of the world and put them in with lions from another part of the world, they would actually interbreed. Okay, so that's why, I mean, and that's why, again, it's like it takes after their kind. It says, why did they go to that specific continent and nowhere else? Because they got cut off. So when they tried to come back, they realized they couldn't get back. The herd animals couldn't get back across. So that's why they're there. I mean, if you look at Africa, Africa's cut off from the rest of the world. Okay, Australia cut off from the rest of the world. India cut off from the rest of the world by the Himalayas. Okay, Asia cut off by the Urals and there's the Ural Mountains here, and then there's the Himalayas down here, and like there's a lot of different animals right in that swath than there is in like Europe. Even before all of the colonization of Europe and all of the main, all of the big, settlements that you had up there, even then there were different animals than you find over, like, past the Ural Mountains into Asia Major. And so when you start getting over Mongolia, China, there's a lot of hilly and steppy places where there's a lot of goats, and there's a lot of, that kind of stuff. And then when you start coming back, you start getting all these different things. It says, how did they get there, traversing inhospitable climates on the way, and with nothing on earth to eat but each other? Well, that's very simple, because as the waters receded, green seeds would have started sprouting. Okay, because it didn't say that Noah took seeds. I mean, he did take some seeds with him on the ark, but it didn't say that he went around the entire world and grabbed every single seed that was there. So that means that seeds in the ground would have been swirled around in the water, and as the water started to recede, they would have been replanted in the soft mud that was full of nutrients, and it would have started to grow. So the herbivores would have had something to eat, and then the predators would have followed them and eaten the weak ones out of the herd as the herd started to grow. Okay, and then you're talking inhospitable climates at the time that this happened. Those climates weren't set up yet. Okay, you don't know what the climate was back then. We don't even know what the climate was back then, and we have climatologists that have been studying this. They don't know what the climate was back then. In fact, they actually think that the climate at the time, like right after the last ice age, they know that there was a period of extreme warming, and they know that there was a global flood after the last ice age, and they know that that global flood caused a lot of things. So either the ice age or it was Noah's flood, either one, it doesn't matter. What happened was is that there was a period of warming after that, and so it would have actually warmed enough that animals would have been able to traverse across certain parts of the world, and then been sealed off. So like if you look at all of the chains from like Japan all the way down to like Australia, there are a huge number of islands separated by fairly shallow water, which during the ice age that water probably would have receded to the point where animals could have walked across there, and then when the waters came back, it would have actually flowed in and cut off the land. Okay, and again, Dr. Kent Hovind talks about this at length, and he's got a way better explanation than what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to kind of run through these and trying to get it. It says, where are the trails of fossils that you think somehow can form in a year, and where are all the modern fossils in general? So the thing is that the fossils would not have formed in a year. The fossils would have formed over the intervening years as the animals had been trapped in the mud, suffocated, and died. Because those layers, as the water receded, okay, where we see the fossils in the layers, okay, so he has a little thing that he likes to rotate around and say, see, you can see all these different sedimentary layers that form, just in a couple of minutes by just rotating this thing around. And that's what we're seeing when we see the global flood. The global flood would have picked up a lot of sediment. It would have created a lot of turbulence, though it says in the Bible that the waters burst forth. So the hydroplate theory says that there was water, there was like a layer of water underneath the crust, and at some point the crust actually kind of expanded or kind of thinned, and then the water started to burst forth, and that's where it gets that the waters burst forth from the ground. And then what that would have done is that would have created a lot of mud that would have swirled around with the water as it was raining and as it was doing all that stuff in a year. And what would have happened is, as the water level was starting to rise, where you'd see the highest concentration of certain fossils, is because those animals would have been trying to get away from the water. Okay, and as they go, and they know, because of the hydroplate theory, they think that the current plates, when the water broke, is why they flowed to where they are now. Okay, and there's a lot of evidence out there that the hydroplate theory might actually be like really good. I mean, you can look it up, but the hydroplate theory is something where it's like you have this whole, you know, it's like it caused rapid plate tectonic activity. Okay, so it would have created volcanoes. It would have created it would have created the impetus for India to come up and smash into Asia Major and create the Himalayas. And you would have had large bars of sand that would have been swept away, and as the water started to recede, then certain barriers would have formed, because we can see that underwater. Like when waves come in, we can see that there are certain areas where it deposits more sediment than others. And so like as it was receding from certain places, as the waters were settling down, like certain places would have had really high silt counts, and things would have been able to walk across those like sandbars. And then once the water kind of eroded that down and compacted it down more to the level that it is now, it would have actually like created, it would have been separated by hundreds of feet of water now, and that's why you have, the islands that you have. They think that that's why Hawaii is the way it is because the way that the plates shifted. That's why Hawaii is where it is now, because if you actually look, it starts at like Midway Island and it goes all the way down to the big island of Hawaii, and there's actually like a new island that's actually forming over the hotspot. But it's like, how did all those little islands get started? And we know that right now the plates are not moving very fast, but back then, when it first happened under the hydroplate theory, that hotspot, that thinning of the crust, would have, as that crust was moving, it would have been bubbling up new lava rock. Okay, and then as that started to slow down, those islands would have built up more, and then it would have created the islands that we see above the water right now. So when it first started, it was bubbling up, and then you see that was Midway Island. But then as the plate started to move, the plate was moving very fast, and so those islands were just kind of popping up like this. And then as it started to settle and started to slow down, that's when it started to form the Hawaiian island chain. And that's why we see the Big Island is the biggest one, and then they get progressively smaller as they go out. And then it's just like tiny underwater mountains all the way up to Midway, which is just this little tiny atoll. You know, and so that's what I'm saying is that hydroplate theory. And that's why you see the fossils where you see them, is because the ones that died first would have been the lowest layers. So your trilobites, your Cambrian explosion would have been all of that sea life that when that first explosion eruption happened under the water, okay, and churned up all that mud, it would have sunk some of the fossils that are there would have gotten sunk. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why we see at the top of Mount Everest, we see sea life. We see life that has never seen a sea before at 29,000 feet. They've actually looked, and they've actually seen like fossilized remains of sea creatures at the top of Mount Everest. How could there be sea creatures at the top of Mount Everest? It would have had that part would have had to have been down at sea level or below, or it would have had to have been covered by the sea at some point for those to get there. Okay, and that explains with that hydroplate theory that as the waters burst forth, some of that sea life would have been trapped, and then as the Indian and Himalayan, or as the Indian and Asian plates, I should say, hit each other, and they started to build up the mountains, then those fossilized remains, those remains would have been trapped, and then they would have been fossilized. So it's not fossils don't grow in a year, but like I said in the first video, there was a guy who had a pickle in a jar and he stuck it in a barn, and like 30 years later he like found it and it was fossilized. So it's not that they fossilized in a year, it's they were buried in mud, and that's where they fossilized, was in the mud layers. Again, you'd have to be a complete idiot not to be able to figure this out on your own, or you've never actually like studied geology, and so you wouldn't know how the sediment layers work. Because I've studied geology. I did like 3 classes of geology. I actually did field study down in Bishop, California, when I was at Central Washington University, and I studied some earthquake movement. I've studied volcanic movement. I've studied all these different things, and so sometimes when I see these guys like popping off, I'm like, dude, that's not how geology works. So anyway, we know how things can happen, and like we know that like certain events can happen that cause catastrophic change, evidenced by the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and that was relatively minor, but we know from observing it that even now, like 40 years on from the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which yes, I'm older than dirt, you can go ahead and make that joke. They actually know now that like in 40 years it has come back. Like there are a lot of trees, there are a lot of woodland creatures that have made it their home. There's a lot of new things in there. The old forests are actually starting to go away. Some of the trees have actually petrified in that 40-year time frame, because they've been buried enough, and how it worked. It's like some of the like they went in and they took some core samples out of some of the trees, and they found that they were actually like on the bottom they were like rock. So again, you talk about like how do fossils don't form in a year, but it's 40 years on from Mount St. Helens. and like the trees that were in the lake have now like started to sink. They turn like this and they start to sink down into the bottom and then they go like this. All of those trees are turning to stone. And who knows, in another, you know, 30 to 40 years, those trees that were in the lake will be completely stone and they'll all be in the bottom of the lake. Okay. So we're observing all of this stuff happening. And so we know that it doesn't take millions of years to form fossils. Fossils can form in 30 to 40 years. So if you bury something in the mud and then come back to it, 1,000 years hence, you leave a note, come to this spot, you leave a map, come to this spot on this date at this time and dig this up. It's going to be calcified. Okay. And it's, like you bury a cat in the backyard. Okay. You just bury the dead cat, you just bury it in the backyard. In another, 100 years, somebody comes and they're digging up the yard, they're going to see a fossilized cat skeleton. And they're going to go, gee, how old is that? And they're going to carbon date it, and it's going to say 1,000 years. And they're going to go, oh, wow, this cat died 1,000 years ago. No, it didn't. It died 100 years ago. But you're not around to tell people that the cat died 100 years ago. You see what I'm saying? Okay. You weren't there. You don't know. Okay. So it says, how does Noah's party populate the world, and where did all the races come from, and why aren't we all inbred? Well, as I reiterated in the previous statement, we're all like 12th cousins right now. Like, you can find that out. That's like a fact. Genetically speaking, we're very, very close relatives of each other. Okay. We're only separated by like a certain number of generations. So technically, we're all committing incest. Technically, we're all inbred. That's where our mutations come from, is because we all have imperfections that have just been passed down through genes as we've populated the earth. Okay? How did we get so many damn breeds of dogs? Seriously, dude. Dogs inbreed all the time. Because anytime a female goes into heat, any male that's near is gonna hump it. Doesn't matter if it was a I mean, it doesn't matter. The dog just knows. It's like, oh, you're in heat. I'm gonna go, hump you. And so at that time, and I don't think that every single human being on Earth died, because we know from post flood legend things that there were people that survived Noah's flood. Noah is the Jewish and Christian story of the flood, but there's a lot of different flood levels. There's the Sumerian flood level. There's like other flood legends and myths and different things. That's our legend is Noah, okay, but we know it's true because we can see the evidence of it. Back then, they just had the oral tradition. People that survived told the story, and down 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 and down. Okay? Because they can't be the only mountains on the earth. Okay? Or the ones in Turkey. Because, and I mean, I think that, there were other huts and there were other things. I think people probably could have survived. There were probably people that built their own boats because they saw Noah building a boat, or they heard of this guy Noah building a boat, so they figured maybe I should build a boat. And then when the waters burst forth, they survived. We just don't know how many people survived because we're only told one side of it. Okay. Like a lot of people were like, "Oh, what about Adam and Eve? There was a lot of inbreeding going on there. Where did Cain's wife come from?" Well, they don't really mention that stuff in the Bible because we're only told what we're told from God. Okay? So were Adam and Eve the original two people on earth? Yes. And it said that it was more than just Cain and Abel. Okay? I mean, they were popping out kids right and left. So, Cain and Abel were just the two that warred with each other because God was showing favor to Abel and rather than Cain. And as punishment, God wanted Cain to think about his mistake of killing his brother. Okay? So, could there have been, I mean, because here's the thing, we don't know when Cain and Abel came along. Okay? We know that they were sons of Adam and Eve. Adam lived for like 960 years, I think it was in the Bible. I don't have the thing in front of me. I guess I can look it up really quick. But he lived for quite a long time. And the problem is that when you start talking about living for that long, how many kids can you pop out in 900 years? I mean, you could. Because again, it doesn't say how long after the expulsion from Eve. It doesn't say how long Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, to Cain and Abel. Like they didn't say, okay, like Adam lived 100 years and then had these two sons. It doesn't say that. It just says the man had intercourse with his wife Eve, and so she conceived and bore Cain. And then she said, I have won back my husband, the Lord is with me. Later she bore his brother Abel. Abel was a shepherd, while Cain was a tiller of soil. And then when so Abel brought some sheep, Cain brought some stuff from his field, and he was like, "Hey, man." Abel's like, "Here's mine," and Cain's like, "Here's mine." And the Lord looked on with favor to Abel and not with Cain. And Cain became very angry and downcast. And the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry and why are you downcast? If you had been doing right, should you be happy? But if you have not, sin will be lurking at the door, and yet he is devoted to you while you rule over him." And Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go off into the country." While they were out in the country, Cain attacked his brother Abel and murdered him. And the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Now here again, the Lord already knew what happened. Okay, the Lord's omniscient. He knows what happened. What he's doing is he's trying to get Cain to admit his sin. Okay, just like with just like with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He knew, God knew where they were hiding. He could have walked right in to where they were hiding. He could have like walked right up behind him. Hey guys, what are you doing in this bush? No, what he did was, is as he was walking through the Garden of Eden, he goes, "Hey, where are you two? What are you guys doing?" Because he wants them to admit that they did wrong. He wants them to admit that they did wrong, and he does. The man comes out and he goes, well, we ate the fruit, but it was her fault." And then the woman's like, "But the only reason I ate was because of serpent." That was the first pass the buck, okay? Was basic, and this is Cain passing the buck on Abel because, he says, "What have you done?" Or he says, "Where's your brother Abel?" "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Like, come on, dude. I don't care about my brother. Like, I don't know. And this is the Lord trying to get Cain to admit his sin because he's already told him the sin is there. You can master it, but you have to be the one to own up to it. And instead, Cain decides to let that sin fester in his heart, and he takes Abel out under a gesture of goodwill. Hey, let's just go out in the country. And as soon as they're outside of the city or the settlement, wherever they're at, he just attacks his brother and kills him. I mean, we're assuming he either killed him with a rock or maybe some kind of a field. He was a tiller of soil. Maybe he used one of his tools to kill him. We don't know. It doesn't say. It just says that he attacked him and murdered him. We don't know if it was what that was, but the Lord, he comes back kind of smiling like, "Oh yeah, all right, God's gonna look on me with favor." And God's like, "Hey, where's your brother?" And he's like, "What do I know? Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord knows. He's trying to get Cain to admit to the sin of killing his brother. Okay? And so he says, "What have you done? Hark, your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground, and now cursed you shall be with banishment from the soil, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." So he's basically saying, where we are living right now, where you killed your brother, you cannot be here because you killed your brother, and his blood is now sacred to me and my people. Okay? And he says, "Though you were to till the soil, never again would it yield to you its full produce. A vagrant and vagabond you shall be on the earth." And he's doing that that's basically Cain's punishment. It's his separation from God. And the fact that God's creation would never give to Cain again. Now, if we go down just a little bit further, Um, it talks about where Cain left, and then let me see here. Yeah. So it says after living 130 years, Adam had a child born. This is chapter 5, verse 3. It says after living 130 years, Adam had a child born to him in his own likeness, resembling himself, and he called his name Seth. Adam lived 800 years after the birth of Seth. So sometime in the years before Adam was created by God, and he bore Seth in that 130 years, there was Cain and Abel. So how many children could, Adam and Eve pump out? Did God create other people on the earth? Possibly. We don't know. It doesn't say, because the only thing that we're told is what God wants us to know. Okay? He's telling the history of his people through Moses, and the history of his people is through Adam. Now, he does talk about Cain going down, because Tubal Cain um, was the first guy to work with kind of iron and bronze in Mesopotamia, and he was one of the people that kind of opposed Noah. It was kind of like, Noah, you're a nutcase for trying to build this ark in the middle of nowhere. Okay, because that's what they were talking about. And you'll notice that all of these people lived a certain number of years up until the flood. But that just means that because Noah had 3 sons, right? So it doesn't say how many children they had on the ark while they were on the ark. Okay, so they could have had children, and those children could have intermarried. Okay, because it says like how many. It says how many the sons and your sons' wives. It doesn't say your sons' children. It just says your sons and your sons' wives. Um, so it doesn't say how many children they had. It just says Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives. Okay, and that's where the Danny Boyle film, I think it was, or whatever, whoever, guy who did Black Swan, I can't remember his name, but he directed Noah, and that really pissed me off, was the fact that he did not show that. And here again, I went a little long because I was trying to get through this point down here. It says, in short, how does the arc myth explain what we see today? It explains it in very, very great detail. And the funny thing is that this guy can't even see it, because he is so blinded by evolution. His faith in evolution, he is so blinded by it that he thinks that the Bible doesn't explain why we see what we see today. But if you start looking at some of the rapid geology that we've seen of flooding, how it changes the course of rivers and streams, and how it can like forge a new path where there was no path before. There are many different rivers that have changed their path just because on a certain flooding season it goes over a certain height, and there was like like there's just sediment built up in there, and then it just gets washed away, and now all of a sudden the river's not flowing in a bend anymore. It's like flowing straight through a certain place, and people are like, geez. And it was like 1 year of flooding. I mean, so you can imagine if you had something that would cover probably 90% of the earth in water. Okay, because if you look at Mesopotamia, it's a very flat region, right? If you look down there in like Saudi Arabia and like the Middle East and the Holy Land, you look at that area, it's very, very, very flat. There's not many really high mountains out there, okay? And so you look at that and you think, yeah, that's why the boat was like tumbling along until it landed in Turkey. Because if you think about it, that's where the mountains are. So yeah, there. I mean, I don't know how much water there was, okay? We are told in the Bible that it covered the land, okay? What does that mean? Does that mean all the land on the earth? Does that mean every single mountain? I mean, I think it does say that it does crest all of the mountains, but depending on where you're living on the earth, a mountain could be 150 feet high. I mean, there's some people in Florida that they have hills that are a couple 100 feet high that they call mountains. Okay, they're molehills, but they call them mountains because it's the highest place in Florida. Florida is a very flat state. In fact, the Everglades are actually below sea level. It's one of the reasons why it's a marsh. Okay, that's where the water settled. I mean, it's that there's a reason for all this. Okay, that can be explained geologically if you understand the processes and you understand what's going on behind the scenes in the Bible when God is talking about this stuff. The problem is these people don't want to read that. What they do is they try to trap you with these stupid questions like this. And they try to say, haha, gotcha, see, you couldn't explain it. Yes, I just did. And Kent Hovind goes into greater detail about, he calls it the Hovind theory, okay? And that's what I'm quoting from, okay? So you can actually look on YouTube, search the Hovind theory, okay? Hovind, okay? The Hovind theory, okay? And you can find his video on it, and he goes into a lot of detail about it. It's like about, I don't know, it's like an hour long explanation of all of the stuff that he goes into that actually accurately explains all of these questions that this guy would never do the research for. Professor Dave would never do this research, and I'll get to that when we get to number 5. But basically, like that's but that's why this is the way it is because this guy, he's never seen a Hovind video, and during his debate, every time Hovind would try to bring up something from his theory, Professor Dave would just shout him down and say, "Oh no, that's not how it works. You don't understand anything." And so Hovind would try to shift, and then he would bring up another point, and so Hovind would have to shift. He's trying to shift back to the point that he's trying to make, and he's like, "Oh, you're changing the subject. You're changing the subject." No, dude, you're trying to yell over him so that he can't explain anything. And then when he tries to go back and explain what he was trying to explain, you're telling him he's trying to change the subject. That's not how a debate works, dude. This is like one of those type of debates where I can, if I had the internet or if I had downloaded the video, I could actually show the video, and then I could tell this guy, like, hey, this is how this works, and this is how this works, and this is how this works. Okay, and I could debunk all of his points. I just thought it would be easier for me just to have the slides and then just explain everything. Okay, because and then just put a link to the video so that you can go listen to his points, and then you can come back and listen to mine. Okay, that's what these are for. These are for discourse. Okay? You listen to his point, you listen to my point, and you make up your own mind. That's what a debate. That's what a true debate is supposed to be. Okay, and that's why I'm saying, like in the first video, I'm going to post the original debate against the three professors that Kent Hovind does, and I mean it's like an hour. I don't know, it's like an hour long. But you can hear that the moderator, says, like, after a certain amount of time, he's like, okay, Mr. Hovind, you're done. Okay, professors, you're done. And then, like, and what he'll do is he'll say, okay, so, like, in the beginning, I think he gave him, like, 10 minutes. Okay, he's like, okay, you professors, you get 10 minutes. Okay. And then, the professor, or, I think Kent Hovind went first. So Kent Hovind stood up and talked about himself for 10 minutes. Talked about his theory, talked about everything. Then he goes and sits down. Then they said, okay, professors, you get like 10 minutes. So then the professors each introduce themselves, and they kind of ramble on about what their special is and about why they're here and about evolution and all this other garbage. And then they went back and forth. Okay, so he was like, okay, so one of the main questions that we're going to start with, oh no, I remember what it was. Like, the professors got to ask a question of Kent Hovind. Okay, and so one of the professors would say, so what do you think about this? Then Kent Hovind would, like scroll down till he got to the point in his PowerPoints, and then he would click on it, and then he would walk over, turn on the projector, and then he would stand there and talk for like 5 minutes. And then the professors had like 2 minutes to respond to his points. Then Kent Hovind asked a question of them, then they got 5 minutes to talk, and then Kent Hovind would have like 2 minutes to respond, and then they would ask a question of Kent. And that was how the debate went. And that's how almost every single debate up until the present, like probably last like 5 years, that Kent Hovind's debates have gone, because normally when you're supposed to be moderating the debate, you have preloaded questions. Then at the end, I think they had some questions that people would come up and ask questions, or like write them down on a piece of paper or something and then give them to the moderator. And then the moderator asked questions, and then each side got a certain amount of time to talk and respond. Okay? So that it wasn't this just talk over each other fest, which is exactly what Professor Dave was doing. Every time Kent Hovind would try to do something, Professor Dave would be like, "You're changing the subject, or you're not answering the question, or you're not doing this." And it's like, yeah, he is. You're just not allowing him to do that, because if it's different than your viewpoint, why would you want to listen to it? And that's the problem. Leftists do it, atheists do it, scientists do it. Everybody does it, and it pisses me off. Okay, and I know I've been talking for like 50 minutes now, so I'm going to go ahead and shut up, and then I'll get to the last question on the last one, and then we'll wrap this sucker up. See you on the next one.